For years now, we've heard a lot of talk about echo chambers, and I briefly mentioned some of this in my talk with my friend about free will. But today I want to take a deep dive into the notion of echo chambers, and more importantly, whether or not it's even possible to resolve deep ideological differences, or even basic differences in worldview, which of course sometimes overlap with ideological differences. You see, in recent weeks, maybe even months, I've been doing some of my own, you could say, sociological research. I've been looking into the views of other people, talking to them in a normal way, acting as if I'm a normie, not revealing my quote-unquote power level, and just listening, for the most part, to people who are possessed of views that are profoundly different from mine, usually people on the left, far left, etc., etc. And it's been a very interesting and unironically enlightening experience for me, and here's why. In part because when you are operating online a lot, like I do, then you do ultimately fall into some kind of echo chamber. But I've been trying to figure out why people do this, and part of it is comfort. But part of it, and this is the kicker here, is that when you actually spend time outside of your echo chamber, as people suggest you should be doing, what do you actually find out? The claim being that you should leave your echo chamber or the group or people that you're familiar with, that you largely agree with, in order to get exposure to new ideas, in order to learn new things, in order to be perhaps proven wrong about your beliefs. Now, that sounds very hokey, and I think it's very nice and idealistic, but my experience having interacted with a lot of people who are ideologically and just fundamentally different from me in terms of their worldview has shown me that that's not really possible. Now, in principle, it is possible. If, for example, you're possessed of an incorrect view of the world, it is possible to be corrected on that and to learn something new. But the problem is, and I have to be blunt here, that people on the left, in my experience, at least the young people below 30, have absolutely horrendously different views from what you could say a normal person might have. Their view of everything from the environment to how human beings operate at a fundamental level, for example, ignoring human biology, you name it. And after this time, I've come to the conclusion that there's no daylight between people like that and people who are even slightly different from them. Their views and takes on things like gender relations, society, even how human beings basically work, i.e. their biology, is so fundamentally different that there's just no daylight there between, say, me and them, and I would argue a lot of people that I'm familiar with. And so the conclusion that I had reached after some period of time was, in fact, that the best way I could get along with such people would be to simply shut my mouth and say nothing and listen, or nod my head in agreement. The things that they think about certain groups of people and their view of the world is so alien in so many ways that I honestly think on a social and cultural level, oftentimes, they are basically aliens. You see, in order for people to get along, there's only so much difference that can be tolerated. There can be differences here and there. There can be, if you wish to do so, a percentage breakdown. Maybe, for example, you agree on 75% of things, but 25% you don't. That sounds, at least hypothetically, like a recipe for something that could work, right? But as you move further and further down to a 50-50, or to the point where you disagree on most things, the chances are that you're not going to get along very well, ultimately. And that's a serious problem. So, in leaving quote-unquote echo chambers behind, usually, in my experience, what you discover is a confirmation of whatever biases you already had. So, a lot of these people, just to use one example, have profoundly different views on sex and gender relations in general. So you talk about, for example, the fact that overwhelmingly, on average, women prefer social professions and men prefer professions involving things or thingness. And they might sort of acknowledge that, although many of them don't, but they'll say it's a social construct. They'll say that it's just how we were raised, and that this can be reverse engineered through social planning and social organization and socialization. In another instance, I remember talking to a leftist who unironically told me that Yes, there's some biological element there, but it's minimal. It's something like 20%. But all the rest, 80% of our human behavior is based upon our socialization. The tiny, tiny element of biology there. And it should come as no surprise to you that I don't think that's accurate. But more importantly, there's no daylight there. If someone believes that the vast majority of our behavior is mediated by what they refer to as socialization, which is, in my humble opinion, a fairly nebulous and undefined term, I don't really like breaking things down in percentage because there's no point in time where nurture really stops. But to undermine the influence of biology and our evolved history just doesn't make sense. You know me after all this time. If you want to understand human beings, you have to take into account our evolved history. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Another point of contention, which shouldn't surprise you, is that every difference in outcome between individuals has something to do with discrimination. Now, in some sense, there's some truth to that. So, for example, we talk about the halo effect frequently. And of course, there's an inbuilt discrimination there. If you're short, you're going to be disadvantaged. If you're tall, you'll be less disadvantaged. In fact, you'll have certain advantages. But when they talk about discrimination, that's not what they're talking about. So human beings are fundamentally the same across the board. Everyone is the same. Everyone, according to these people, has the same potential. And the reason why they don't achieve that potential is because A, of discrimination, because B, they were socialized incorrectly. That's the answer to virtually every problem and failure on the part of human beings in life. There are some subtleties there, but generally speaking, that is the overarching view. And so, having interacted with such people, having explored this realm, if you will, I've just come to the conclusion that echo chambers or not, there's no way that you can really bridge this gap. And so in light of this, I've really come to the conclusion that in some essential sense, we have reached the point of no return. As in, the viewpoints of these disparate factions inhabiting the world, and especially the internet, are so far removed from each other that it's nigh impossible to find any common ground, really on anything. And as I said, profound differences between people lead to profound disagreements. You can't, and probably even shouldn't, want 100% overlap on everything, although it's very comfortable. But you still want a majority of overlap if you are going to interact with people on any regular basis. It's just not possible. I realized early on in my interactions during this sociological research that I couldn't really share my perspective because they would accept none of it, and they would make all kinds of assumptions. I learned this early on because I had one interaction in particular that turned into just such a fiasco. I was talking about the potential of genetic engineering to improve human beings, improve their lot in life, improve their outcomes, and basically to grant them more fulfilling lives, whether it comes to intelligence, whether it comes to looks, whatever. And essentially, I got dogpiled almost instantly with all kinds of accusations and allusions to you-know-what, that I somehow wanted to perpetuate the Third Empire and carry on the work, and that I supported National Socialism, and that sounds just like what Mustache Man might have done. And I made no such argument for that. I laid out my case very clearly and how it would benefit people. But yeah, they were totally against it. And indeed, many of them voiced concerns that didn't even occur to me. For example, what would happen if lots of people genetically modified their babies to have blonde hair and blue eyes too frequently? That never even occurred to me. I was thinking specifically about psychological traits and intelligence, and to a lesser degree overall appearance, but I never thought about specific phenotypes, and yet they were the ones that brought that up to me. And so that taught me early on in my interactions with these people that I need to keep my mouth shut and just listen, because my views are so far removed from theirs and vice versa, and they will automatically assume the worst about anything I say if I express even an inkling of what I think about reality to them, as opposed to their own view. And so I really think that we've reached that point of no return. We cannot go back from this. Now, some people might argue, well, hold on, Stardusk. This is the internet. Common argument. It's only online that it's like that. But, I've made a video in the past suggesting that the internet has by now well bled into our common reality. Outside of the internet, when we're not plugged in, that is a thing. People are being informed by the internet, and they are carrying out that information into reality and acting it out in their lives. We see this in education with the you-know-what issue. We see this at universities, and so on. So the idea that the internet is a separate bubble from reality is at this stage, to be perfectly blunt, farcical. It's just not the case. There is plenty of bleed over from both places, and more bleed over online into IRL than ever before. And the frightening thing about this fundamental inability to reconcile differences, and the fact that people are essentially living in different realities, their views of everything are so different from people that are even a little bit more to the right of them. Well, how are you going to form coalitions? How are you going to get things done? And the concern here, for the most part, is the fact that a lot of these people are 30 or under. And as they get older, they will become the majority population. And their views and their inclinations will take over. And so the ability then to work together, to cooperate, something that used to be a fundamental pillar and building block of political advancement, or just getting anything done at the legislative level, but also just more broadly speaking, getting along IRL, just getting things done in your neighborhood, that can shrink and wither away as well. In fact, I think it will. And the animus that these individuals feel towards people that are different from them, well, it's quite frightening. The things they advocate for. I can't even express publicly some of the things they've suggested, but it is very frightening. So this, I think, is really the point of no return. I think we've been so infused by the internet and so infused by our quote-unquote echo chambers, our bubbles, that there's no way to find that bridge that we can cross between people of differing views. It's over in that respect. It's just not possible. And again, it's not just an online thing. This is bled over into real life. Yes, there are plenty of people who don't think this, but I don't think they're the majority. And so you can talk about echo chambers or bubbles, but the delta is just too big. How are you going to cross that delta? Especially if you believe fundamentally that people are wrong. I fundamentally believe this paradigm of everything is socialization and biology has very little to do with how we are as human beings. I believe that to be fundamentally wrong and a fabrication and just a misrepresentation of the reality that we all jointly inhabit. But in any event, it doesn't look good. It is probably over in this respect. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons and donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. You keep the channel alive and going. Without you, all would be naught but dust and ash. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, it'd be much appreciated. Supposedly it helps out the channel. I'll check you out next time. Until then, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.